Well, welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here, and I am joined by Barna President David Kinnaman. And here we are. Happy New Year.
Hey, Carey, how's it going?
Good. It's going really well. You just celebrated a birthday. Happy birthday, too.
Thank you. We got the train going by right now. It's commuter morning. So yeah, yes, my birthday is the same day as Jesus, and December 25th. I was always sort of what would you say? Sort of not able to get all the presents that you deserve. Sort of the twofer. These are for your Christmas and your birthday. And the thing is, now I really appreciated having a birthday on Christmas because I'm always with family. There's always a lot of NBA basketball games on, just sit in front of the TV. I usually work on a Lego set, which is just like my little happy space. Hanging out with family, and then we usually do like a Christmas breakfast and then my birthday dinner, which, the funny story and legend within my family is that we're lucky if it's actually on my birthday when we eat dinner and when we have the cake, because it's by the time everyone finishes opening presents, having Christmas breakfast, it's like 9, 10, 11 p.m. and sometimes we're singing happy birthday after the birthday has actually expired, but that's all right. I give them a pass because I am just like the Messiah and give everyone my true and utter forgiveness.
So much grace.
So much grace.
And you never have to work on your birthday, which is really cool, right?
Yeah, that's true. And it's
the whole world actually pauses for you, which is
right.
It must be hard not to let that go to your head, David.
Well, I mean, I have joked that it helps to explain my Messiah complex. Being born on Christmas Day.
Well, happy birthday, man. And we're on the cusp of another new year, in the middle of, once again, more disruption, more crisis. And that's why we started this podcast. For those of you who joined us a little bit later in the narrative, we launched this shortly after the world closed down in early 2020, thinking it was going to be a 6-month project of trying to figure out which end is up. And so here we are heading into year 3 of crisis. And we're excited to have Dave Lomas with us. We'll talk a little bit with him later. But as usual, we have some statistics that we are diving into. And I mean, we're kind of joking around and having fun, but I don't know about you, David. I really feel the heaviness for leaders and particularly for pastors of heading into year 3 of crisis and having to deal with all this uncertainty. And just when we thought we were out of the woods, Omicron, a word nobody knew a month and a half ago, is even those of us who did well in Greek.
Greek, right?
We're like, wait, which one was that again? Omicron. Okay. I won the prize, but I thought it was Omicron, just like I can't pronounce Cabo. Anyway, never mind. But here we are, and I'm very concerned for the toll that this is taking on leaders and on the church. And so we're just going to partner with you, and we're going to try to be here and bring you some relevant conversations and some data to help us find our way in the midst of the mess.
I think what's so hard for leaders today, I know I'm feeling this and have for the last few years, certainly leading Barna and just a lot of life, but it feels like when you finally have a little glimmer of hope, and maybe a big glimmer of hope that things can change, that you've turned the corner, that the tide is going out, that there's some hopeful reality around the corner, and then sort of like the rug is pulled out from under you. There's a sense in which, oh wait, now we have to go back under mandates or some other kind of reality. And again, we're all sort of, I think, more depleted than we would hope to be. Certainly, church leaders that we hear from, there's many who are doing pretty well, but there's just a lot of challenges. So many people have left; they haven't come back. We've talked on the show around the fact that so many leaders, people just disappeared, and the toll that takes emotionally on us as leaders when people that we thought we were close to just sort of vanished. So lots to think through here, and we're both really hopeful about where the church is going and these new opportunities. We'll be talking about that with Dave Lomas, but also just realistic. Like, it's a tough time for leaders, and paying attention to that part of our interior world is, I think, really, really important to find the resilience in the Lord first, and then in friendships, and then in our calling.
Yeah. Well, you've got some stats for us today. Why don't we go through them, and then we'll bring Dave in.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, on the subject of friendships, when we asked pastors about their closest friend or friends, 58% said that this person was a pastor in another city or town. 31% said this was a person of another church in their city, and 44% said this was a person in their church. So you can see it adds to more than 100% because they could click more than one option. But you can see there's some interesting dynamics there. Again, it's not wrong to have your closest friend in your church, but that does raise some challenges, right, in terms of how you think about that. And then in terms of satisfaction with friendships, only 1 in 5 pastors rated their satisfaction with friendships as excellent. We've talked about this stat before on the show, and 12% rated it as below average or poor. So 1 in 8 are ranking it in this way. So, anyway, I think this sense of how we talk about that loneliness, is a big deal. 60% of Protestant pastors frequently or sometimes feel lonely. That's, again, I think it's just good that we can admit it. I think this is such a great moment. It sounds funny, but like in light of all the mental health challenges, in light of all these relational challenges and sort of social isolation that we've been through, I think one of the great aspects of our current environment is that people are pretty honest. Leaders are pretty honest. They're able to click a box on our surveys telling us they're lonely. I think it's actually a huge opportunity with millennials and Gen Z. Something also we've talked on the show that they're pretty open. They're pretty willing to talk about just about anything, and they don't see mental health or some of these questions as taboo, which I believe is just such an important opportunity for the church.
On the weekend, we were away for an overnight just nearby, a couple hours away in the Niagara region with some friends of ours, just 2 couples that we track pretty closely with. And a couple of them are doctors, and drove down with them. We all rapid tested just to make sure nobody had Omicron, et cetera, et cetera. But it's so exhausting for healthcare professionals. And it was funny because we were having breakfast. We had dinner together, hung out, and then we had breakfast the next morning before Elle took off. And, they were just saying it felt like an oasis in the desert, having to go back to the challenges of healthcare in the crazy environment that's been. And we were all texting each other that day about how grateful we are for the friendship that we have. And I don't know about you, but like to me, deep, authentic friendships are like a reset. If you have some really good quality time, it's like, okay, I can live to see another day. Like I can do this again for a little bit longer, and not to over spiritualize it, but I think that's one of God's gifts. And so that's my hope for leaders as we head into 2022, that they would find some more friendships. Also, David, you and I are together with the whole team at Barna, very excited about the state of your church, which is happening in early 2022. Do you want to tell us about it a little bit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, for more than 3 decades now, Barna Group has been focusing on state of the church. And the last couple of years, we've been working on a lot of different tools and resources and ways of thinking about the state of your church or the state of my church, the kind of more like sort of congregational level of understanding what's happening in the pews, in the people that you're serving. And so we've been talking on this show and other things through the last couple of years of the flourishing of people. How can we measure how well people are doing beyond just whether they show up? Because it turns out that's not the only way to measure or to look at what's happening. And then the thriving of organizations and the health of our leaders, or the health of us as leaders. So anyway, State of Your Church will be a free webcast. It's designed for you to bring your whole team around. We've got a long tradition Barna has of providing sort of free content to leaders to try to help them make sense of their reality and to lead forward. And so we're so excited to be able to come alongside you as leaders. So make sure you register at barna.com/stateofyourchurch, barna.com/stateofyourchurch. And Carey will be there. I'll be there. We'll have a lot of different guests, and we'll be sharing some new research. So can't wait to see you there.
Okay, great. Well, I'm excited to have Dave Lomas on the podcast today. Dave is currently the teaching and vision pastor of Reality San Francisco. He started ministry in 1997 and was ordained at the age of 21 as a youth pastor after serving vocationally for ministry in 10 years. He and his wife planted Reality SF in 2010. Dave's also written a book called The Truest Thing About You, a project that came from his lessons pastoring through the first few years at his church. Dave, welcome.
Hi, Carey, David. So good to be with you all.
Thanks for joining us, Dave. Yeah, so Carey, you might not know this, but Dave and I, our some of those friends. We hang out with some frequency. We're both here on the West Coast. He's up in San Francisco, or SF. A little known fact is that locals call it SF, not San Fran.
No.
So that's an San Fran.
There you go.
Frisco is making a comeback.
Yeah.
People calling it Frisco. It's coming back.
Frisco.
Nice. So Dave and I have a lot of fun there. My oldest daughter lives up in the Bay Area, and then in addition, we've attended for many years a church that's part of the family of churches that Dave is pastoring, called Reality. So it's a wonderful church community, and started by Britt and Kate Merrick here in Carpinteria, California. So I consider Dave one of my good friends.
That's right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I feel privileged to be part of the conversation today. So any reaction to the data? Let's talk about friendship, because that has been a theme on a couple of episodes lately here on Church Pulse Weekly. When you think about the role of friends, looking back at what's kind of gotten you through the last 2 years, what role has that played? And then what are some of the missteps maybe that you had in friendship? I know I definitely have had some missteps, friendships I thought were real that kind of dissolved. And, a lot of leaders have had that, people who've left the church that you thought, hey man, these guys were my friends. Like when you look back on the last 2 years through the lens of friendship, what would have been some of the highs and lows for you, Dave?
Well, I'm someone that gives myself to friendships. Like, I think I wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for friendships. And so I try to see friendships as something very loyal. Like, if you're a close friend of mine, we're going to be loyal, to the end. So when I think of the last 2 years, really it's been friendships that have gotten me through the last 2 years, especially friendships with pastors. Like, I have some really, really close friendships with pastors, and the commiseration that happens is so invaluable. Like, to be able to be as honest as you without any sort of holding anything back or trying to impress this other person, to be able to be as honest as you need to be with them, and still be loved, and them saying that groan on the other side of the phone, that yes, that how we're all afraid of getting canceled in 2020, and then we're all afraid of no one coming back in 2021. Those things that you're able to share, they've been huge. I mean, friendships are, and then sneaking away, planning things together where you meet up and you spend a weekend together or a few days together, has been huge. It's been kind of everything. So I have a group of friends that I journey with. I think, I'm 43 now. I think of I started a lot of the friendships that I have in my 30s. And I kind of think, finding friends early and then keeping them for the rest of your life and growing deeper is the goal for a lot of the friends that I have. So 2022 and 2020 or 2020 and 2021 has accelerated the depth of our commitment to each other. So
yeah, does some of that, and if my research is incorrect, just correct me, but you're involved with what John Mark Comer, John Tyson, the Crock Sessions, you're involved that. Is some of that part of your friendship circle?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, we started Crock 8 years ago now. And the idea of Crock was we all lead similar churches in similar places kind of globally. And how do we commit ourselves to each other to serve Christ faithfully over a long period of time? That was the goal. If we want to make it to when we're in our 70s and still be doing this faithfully, we have to make sure that we're around people that will be guardrails for us, all of us, communal guardrails, keep us theologically faithful and faithful to the ministry and faithful to our vocation and all of that stuff. So out of that group of Crockers, I don't know what we call each other, but out of that Crock friendship, there's maybe 3 of them that I'm in deep friendship with, weekly call type friendship with, family vacations together friendship with. And then the other ones I see annually, sometimes more than annually, but we stay in contact.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think there's a lot of leaders listening who would say, okay, invite me into the Crock Sessions, please, Dave. Like, I want in, right? Which doesn't necessarily work. But I think the thing about when you started the Crock Sessions with John Mark and John Tyson and people like that, you were just friends trying to figure it out together, right? So
right.
What advice would you have for leaders who are like, I need that? What you just described in a couple minutes, I need it. I don't have it. How would you even start? How would you begin?
That's a great question. It's actually a similar question that we're finding with small groups in our church in a transient city like San Francisco, is like, you need to have a starting point together. If you have a starting point together, you guys are all asking the same questions. You're trying to figure it out together. And that itself is like this glue that like binds you together. So unbeknownst to me, John Mark and I planted our church on the exact same day, him in Portland, me in San Francisco. We didn't know each other until a few years later. We met in Chicago. And Tyson, very similar, planted and replanted and planted again. He's planted a few churches in New York.
He has.
And right around the similar time, and very similar cities. And so I think right now, if I was starting something and I try to reach out to John, it'd be more like a mentor me sort of thing, which is valuable. But we're talking about friendship. So it's finding the people, the men or women that are in very similar situations as you. And then like, hey, let's just collaborate together and see what happens. That's usually where it starts. Let's collaborate together. Let's learn from each other. For us, I want to invite you out to my church. I'll go to your church, whatever, that sort of thing, that pulpit swap thing. It's that collaboration is really, really key. You have to be willing to and have a hunger. And most young leaders are to learn, learning how to put your ego aside, to I'm not the person who has it figured out and I'm going to tell you everything. It's like mutually learning from each other. Like, what are you learning? This is what I'm learning, and sharing documents. Like there's so many documents that early on that flew back and forth. Like I meet with John, and John, just a fountain of wisdom. Like he has so much documents and so much wisdom. I'm like, John, send me everything on your Dropbox. Just send me your Dropbox link. I want all the stuff you have, that sort of thing. And we'll do something like send me that link, or send me that document. It's like that sort of thing. You're sending and learning from each other. And then what happens is the friendship forges over time. It took, it just takes time. So I say starting together. That's the thing, starting together.
Well, that's a thing. If I can insert an editorial comment, because I've thought about this a lot. It's like, we all want to be in with people who are well known. It's like, oh, if John Tyson would be my friend, then my life would be a lot better. But the reality is, he's got a full plate. The guy down the road or the woman down the road who is near you as a leader is far more likely to have lunch with you than, someone that maybe has a slightly larger profile. So I think that's a really good word along the way.
Yeah, I think of John Mark and I joke a lot of time. We meet, obviously just a lot of pastors and a lot of people. And we kind of joke that we're not necessarily looking for new friends. We're early 40s. We have really good friends and we want to be faithful and growing long and deep with these friends. We're not necessarily looking for brand new friends. Sometimes they happen and they're like this kindred and it's pretty amazing. But people learning how to find those people that are in a similar place that are looking for that sort of thing. Because who knows, those people will be the next John Tyson or the next John Mark or whatever. And that's the thing that when we started Crock Sessions, so Crock is different than Crock Sessions. Crock is our group of 12, 13 guys that meet every year. And then from that, after meeting 7 years, decided we need to help spread this and just give this away. So we opened it up to 100 leaders, hoping that they would start their own sort of they would meet their people. And through that, they would begin their own cohort of leaders and grow together. So that was the idea. And hopefully we might keep them going. We don't know yet.
I'm listening in on this and so much good stuff. And I'm also at a season of my life where I'm thinking about this sort of I'm just ordered, I haven't read it yet, but a book called The Middle Passage, and sort of this idea of midlife, and I'm now 48 as of this last birthday, and so I'm totally with you, Dave. I also wonder about this idea of growing deeper in relationships. I'm at a spot in life where lots of things are changing. Many listeners will know my wife passed away now almost a year and a half ago, and like that's obviously changed a lot in my life, and there's just a lot of things. But I've been talking to a mentor of mine the last few weeks about how easy it is for us as leaders to sort of get stuck in our ways and not to learn and grow and evolve. And so while I completely agree with you with this question of, go deep with friends, I also think we should be really open to being surprised in different seasons of our life, because it's very easy as human beings age. There's I think this myth that we become more mature as we get older. I think that can be true. I also think I often describe it's like many of the older people that I see, and I see these little strands in my life now, they become caricatures of themselves. It's like, they, like, if you guys have heard or seen, a speaker who's been on the circuit, who's been out for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? And it's like you're hearing the same material that you heard, the same shtick. And it's just like, I've been asking the Lord a lot in this season for, fresh vision, new friends. Like it's never too late to sort of start again. And again, some of that's in my own just journey, but anyway, I wonder what you guys think about that. I'd love to hear from both of you guys about, the fine balance between, attending what's old and sacred to us in terms of friendship or place or any of it, versus leaning in on what God's doing new in our lives and being open to being surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'd say to that, I 100% agree with that. There's no category for like, it's hard because friends is such a huge bucket, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I have new friends all the time, and there's some really, really fresh energy that comes from meeting new folks and spending time with them, getting their perspective on life. And I think that's great and good. Like I still do that. So I'm not like saying don't do that. I 100% agree.
Because I had some little posters printed up from David Lomas, like, make no new friends. No, just kidding.
That's the hot take. I would say there is something, especially for leaders, where because a lot of leaders, like, they love fresh energy. They love meeting new people and then gleaning and learning and from all these new folks. But are there people that have known you since, before anyone else knew you, and have known your marriage and seen this long obedience in the same direction, which we started to see rock at Eugene Peterson's house. So it's like that sort of thing. Like that was our thing. Like we're at his house visiting him. I think it was a year and a half before he passed. And we're like, we want this long obedience in the same direction together, so that we watch each other's lives over a long period of time. There is something about that history that is important. Yet I met new friends on Friday night at a restaurant. That was incredible. There was like communal restaurant we went to, and like swapping numbers at the end and meeting new people that had no idea who I was or who our church was really. And just, so that and there's so much new, fresh energy. That stuff's really, really fun as well.
Yeah,
I agree with Dave. I've got like almost a decade on you, David, and decade and a half on you. I'll be 57 in March. And, it is interesting because I think the caricature thing is real. I also think what often happens, particularly in your 50s, it starts in your 40s, but you become very cynical. Because you've seen everything. You're now on round 8 of whatever you happen to be doing. And your world naturally starts to get a little bit smaller. So I'm kicking against that. I'm trying to really treasure the great relationships, but be open to new things. And I think surrounding yourself with new relationships and younger staff can really help. Some of the big changes we're going through in my company this year, I didn't think of. I don't have that kind of imagination, but my younger team members do. And if you take them seriously and you kind of reinvent yourself, it's an awful lot of fun. And I do really enjoy new. I love the future, but I think it has to be a discipline you cultivate at this point. That's really important.
And it seems to me like part of our challenge as ministry leaders is, I'll just use a phrase that's not always exactly true, but just for the sake of it, is like a disposable relationships, because there's some transactional nature in what people can do for us. And if we're being honest, sometimes that's just part of it. People, we want them to come to the church. We want them to be on a board. We want them we want them to be part of our, sort of self-aggrandizement project. and I think there is something really valuable with people that don't need anything from us, that can't offer us anything, that see us for who we are, all of our, sort of eccentricities. So I think the longer those relationships can last, where there is nothing to be gained and nothing to be lost, that's great. In fact, we were just yesterday with one of my dear friends who, ironically enough, he's been a pastor to me. He's been a type of best friend named Doug Colby. He's been just an incredible friend. And 20 something years ago when we met over hamburgers, and I told him literally, I was like, hey, Doug, I'm not sure if I have space to make new friends, but I just want you to know, like, I'm cheering for you here at the church. We laughed still. He hugged me yesterday. He's like, I guess I'm glad we made it through the early days of, your filters there, Dave. And he's become a dear friend. So
that's good.
Well, that is, as somebody who's now almost over 6 years out of the lead pastor seat, it's really, and that's why I think these relationships are so important, Dave. If you ended up, I'm sure you're going to lead your church for years to come, but if Reality SF disappeared tomorrow, you would still have those friendships. It is not conditional on it. And, I went from leading a church that 3,000 or 4,000 people would call home to not leading a church anymore. And it's funny, you move from 3,000 or 4,000 people that you're in some form of relationship with to a handful who turn out to actually be your friends. And I think that's a really sobering lesson, because you don't realize it, but as you were saying, these people were people that were your friends because they were on your board, or, they were top donors, or they were volunteers, or they were new people at the church, or they were in your small group or whatever. But it's really been clarifying. I think about it. It's like I tell leaders, hey, they're not actually your friends. Like, be friendly to them, but you got to realize when you got nothing to give, you're not in that position anymore. Who is left? And fortunately, I mean, two of the folks that we were with this past weekend were, he was an elder and, all that, but it's our friendship has survived all of that to the point where, it's just a friendship, which is the best. It's just so good. So, well, I have a feeling this is starting to feel a lot like dinner where we could just talk for hours, but there are a few questions I want to hit, Dave, before we let you go. I want to talk about preaching, and I want to talk about model. Those are questions I really want to drill down on in this new season of Church Pulse Weekly. Has preaching changed at all during the pandemic for you? And if so, how?
That's a great question. And I'm not just saying that, it's legitimately good. I had to think about that a lot this week.
Well, Lauren on the Barna team came up with that one. So Lauren, shout out to you. Okay.
It's a good question. And the funny thing is I've actually been thinking about it for the last month, but I couldn't put my finger on that as being the question I was asking. Here's how it's changed. I, like a lot of people that started their churches 10, 15 years ago, have been, and even today, have been a disciple of Tim Keller, like just thoroughly learned how to pastor in a city from Pastor Tim. Yeah. And one of the things that he said early on, and I remember reading this and hearing it from him, is that preach to the city, preach to people that are not in the room yet, and handle their arguments and their presuppositions and that sort of thing. And I did that. I tried really, really hard to do that. And when I couldn't do a good job, I would just take something he said that was good and said, this is what Keller said. It works. It literally works, because people invite their friends and people, blah, blah, blah. The pandemic changed that. I just was actually trying to put my finger on this last month. I'm like, what has changed in something's different in the way I even study. But that has shifted for me in the last almost 2 years now. And the way it shifted is because, first of all, we were virtual for until July of this year. So we were virtual for a minute. And because we were virtual, no one was in the room. So before, I was like preaching to people that were in the room, but people that were not in the room. And then all of a sudden there was no one in the room. I'm like, who am I preaching to? I'm preaching to, first of all, I was preaching to this like statue bird that was in my living room when I was at home. And then it was into this like small staff audience. And anyway, I don't want to get triggered right now, so I'm going to move beyond that memory. But then how it really shifted is that I was thinking of the people who were at our church, that were at our church through thick and thin. Obviously, like all the stuff and the amenities of our church and the gathering and the like seeing people and the free coffee and blah, 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 all this stuff, like connection, all that's gone. It's just like songs and sermon on a video. And people that were there were only people that really wanted to be there. So my preaching shift to saints, like I'm teaching people in our church and I'm teaching them to be resilient during this time, and I'm encouraging them. And so and this wasn't a conscious thing, it was a subconscious thing. I shifted to teaching to the entire city, to teaching just the slice of the city that was at our church. And I've just even picked up on that in the last, 5 months since we've been back in person. Just like, I don't even think I shifted away from that. It's just something that I'm very becoming conscious of now.
Do you, look, this is a leading question, so feel free to disagree. Do you think, because I hear what you're saying. I mean, I preached for over 20 years, 25 years almost at our church as, the lead pastor and then founding teaching pastor. And I'm just going back to do 2 weeks in January, and that might be it for 2022. I don't know. I'm wrestling with, am I still a preacher or not? I'm trying to figure that out. But I feel like it has changed. And I want to suggest to you, because I agree, we're trying to reach the city, but people were on with their merry lives prior to the pandemic. Some were good, some were bad. Some people were going through divorce. Some people were going through economic difficulty. But everybody kind of had their default. Their life was going, and then they had spiritual questions. And I feel with these cascading crises that we've had, I wonder if what you're really doing now is pastoring everybody, whether they're churched or unchurched, that people are coming to you bandaged and broken and fragile. And that maybe what you're doing is just kind of like enveloping them. I don't know. Does that resonate, or am I off?
Yeah, I think that does. Yeah, because before the way that I would structure a sermon would be around, obviously reading all the articles, reading all the stuff, and keep my ear to the ground, and like, what's coming up out of the city, and then like taking this topic or text and like, what do people assume about this text, and how in the world can I insert the kingdom of God in this text? Anyway, I would just be doing, this is how I was thinking about it. But now it's shifted. Yeah, you're right, Carey. It shifted to go like, people are hurting and they need the comfort that comes from the kingdom of God, and they need to learn how to live in the kingdom of God in such a way that when they recite Psalm 23, it's their life. Like they actually are, they're living with God in such fellowship they can say, I lack nothing, because the Lord's my shepherd. Like that sort of, like, I want that to be true of my church. And so I'm trying to teach them with that lens to go, how do you live in the kingdom of God in such a way in turbulent times that you can say this and be with God in this way? So yeah, it's completely shifted.
Yeah, there was almost a resistance. Like people were dragged to church, and I don't think anyone's getting dragged to church anymore. I think people who come there have a curiosity. If you think about in the old days, people used to talk about the scale of 0 being total atheist and 10 being committed Christian. People would come to church, when they were a 3 or a 4, down the spectrum. And now I don't know whether that's so true, or whether the people who were 3s are now 5s or 6s. It's like, I don't know. There's just something in that.
Well, I feel like so many of the spiritual questions are being reframed, and we're seeing, just from a social researcher point of view, the fact that, we've joked about this, like people just weren't that into the church. And so, a lot of people for whom this was, kind of just a part of their social activities. And that's not even a negative. I think there's some formation that can happen just through people showing up. But it seems like we're doing some research. Hopefully we'll launch it this year, but just like, what are the different segments of people and how they have changed, and among the people that have sort of they were there and not there now, some are just sort of pursuing other kinds of avenues. They're realizing, actually, George Barna predicted this, more than 20 years ago, this book called Revolution, where he said, people are going to be going to house churches, and their spiritual input and output isn't going to be mediated through a local congregation. He got, roundly chastised for some of that, maybe for good reason, maybe not. But he really predicted this idea that spiritual input and output would be changing, and I think the pandemic really accelerated a lot of that. I mean, more than half of millennials before the pandemic were using podcasts, sort of YouTube and other sorts of forms of digital church. I mean, like not necessarily having to go to church, and we'd grease the skids, because that was sort of what we do in the content distribution business as local pastors, right? So I think that was was interesting. But I think anyway, I feel like the whole set of questions that are happening related to, how are people experiencing and expressing their spiritual questions. I think you're sort of onto something there, Carey. Like people who might have been at a 7, there's whole different ways now, I think, of looking at that, which by the way, where people are on and their spiritual journey, which by the way is part of what we're trying to tackle on this State of Your Church webcast, just to kind of remind you all of that we're trying to give you as leaders like a different set of tools to think about what you're trying to do to transform lives. And it's not just whether people showed up. We never really were into that business anyway, but we kind of backed our way into, figuring out our success based on the size of our church. But anyhow, I just think it's an especially present question for us, is like, how do we really know what's happening in the lives of our ministry, of the people we minister to, and in our congregations, the institutional part of it, which is this whole flourishing and thriving part of I think what's going to be helpful. So.
No, good insights, David. And I remember saying in the first year of this podcast during 2020, your thought prediction based on what you're seeing and feeling is that 20% of churches might disappear during the pandemic. That probably is accurate, but nobody expected this many people to disappear from our churches, which leads me to the final question I want to ask you, which is church model. I think now, we've seen the shock and trauma of the upside down world of the last couple of years, heading into year 3 of this. And clearly there are probably emerging now parts of the model of church that most of us would have embraced that we would say aren't working anymore. And then some experiments or rethinking around parts of our model. And simply by, some people would be like, I don't have a model of church. Well, you're not having a model of church. It's actually a model of church. I'm not saying, oh, I follow this or I follow that. I'm just saying we all have a way we do church. We all have a methodology. And some of the old methods clearly are probably broken. And then there are new methods that are emerging. And of course, the goal is to adapt the methods so you preserve the mission. The mission is the same, the methods change. What are you seeing at Reality SF for you with that, Dave? Like, what would you say is now, you're like, I'm pretty much ready to pronounce this broken, and here's what we're trying and we're seeing traction. And it's okay if you're like, no, we're not seeing traction anywhere. You are in the world of most leaders. So we're just trying to discern that.
Yeah. Well, I am still trying to figure out how hybrid church, how you disciple through hybrid church.
Yeah.
Like part online, part in person. We at Reality, on purpose, we did this. This was a conscious effort to reject everything technological at our church. Not everything, obviously, but most things technological at our church, because our city was inventing all these technologies. And it was almost like a kind of a punk rock way of going. And they liked it too. They're like, I know I work for the man. I know I work for, Facebook, and it's evil and what a blah, blah, blah. But, that's how I'm making a living. And I'm trying to change it from the inside. You had all these people saying that. I've met people that said that so many different times. And then when I go to church, I love that we're kind of punk rock, that we reject this technology. So we didn't do any live stream. We were just like in the room, you're in the room, you're in the room. That was it. And we didn't embrace technology. And then we had to embrace it. And now we're in this hybrid where I still feel like we can't let it go because it serves so many people that still don't feel safe in a room, Mm-hmm. So now it's out of like love. I'm still trying to figure out literally how to actually disciple through hybrid church. And what's broken there is like, I don't know if it's broken. It was never there for me. So I don't know how to even say it was broken. It's just, I can't figure it out how to make it go. I can't figure out to make it live. How do you disciple in a hybrid model? The way that I see church, and this is just me, my opinion is that it needs to be, people long for like the incarnational, real flesh and blood body, embodiment. We live in a city. I live in a city where more and more the body is becoming obsolete, and people are writing articles about it. There's podcasts about it. Like the body is an obsolete thing. Why is there gyms
what do
that
you mean
exist?
by that?
meaning we don't need a body. We just need to upload our consciousness. We need to get rid of our bodies. Our bodies are weights. They call them meat suits. Our bodies are meat suits, and they don't do anything for us. They actually weigh us down. We don't need our bodies anymore. We work on computers, and if we can just get rid of our fingers and just hyperlink this, I mean, this is the Matrix, right? If we just hyperlink this computer into our brains and just use our brains to do the thing, I mean, this is like a lot of the conversation happening around the Silicon Valley. And
yeah, and there is just, can I add a little bit of context before you finish that? And because I listen perhaps to similar podcasts, right? But when we look at AI, you are talking about emerging with humanity with HI. I know that's going to sound like heretical and everything, but this idea that your brain actually interacts with AI and artificial intelligence, away you go. So this is not some crazy thing, and we're heading into the era of the metaverse. So excursus finished. Continue. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think my theology says that the body is good, and embodied reality we were given a body for a reason. And because of that, I think the church has to move toward, again, this is my opinion, a more embodied presence. So how does that then coincide with the model of virtual church? And that's I honestly don't have the answers to these questions. I believe for our church, because we have such an AI push, and because more and more people are being indoctrinated by like the body, whatever with the body, it doesn't matter what we do with our bodies, where our theology says the body is very, very important. And God becoming flesh, which we just celebrate on Christmas, God becoming flesh, becoming human, shows that the body is good. And the resurrection of the body shows that the body is good. And so how does our church show that? And I think, again, I was just at a dinner party. A friend of mine opened a new restaurant in San Francisco. And the idea of this restaurant is this one giant communal table, 2 seatings a night, and you're around random strangers eating incredible food, but you're having conversations. And I mean, I was sitting around a bunch of tech people, and they were loving this. This is like, they're like, this is our thing. Like, we've done everything in San Francisco. We want this. We want genuine connection. And it's just interesting. I think if you're asking me where the church is going to innovate, I think this is it. I think with millennials, Gen Y, like this generation come up, they're going to long for this. Of course, they're going to have the digital life. They're going to have that, what they long for, what we've learned from the Matrix and Ready Player One and all these these prophetic sci-fi things, is that we long for embodied connection. So I think if, as much as the church can be thinking about that as we're hybriding and innovating and all that stuff, but thinking, where's this going to ultimately go? This ultimately will go back to embodied presence. How do we try to stay ahead of the curve and creatively get there first? That's kind of how I'm thinking. So I don't know if that answered your question, Carey, but that's the stuff I've been thinking about around that question.
One of the things that sparks for me is this idea that's been rattling around my head for 2-3 years, is that with all the dystopian fiction, you mentioned Ready Player One, and it goes back even to like Blade Runner and lots of different movies. I mean, it's a whole genre. Hunger Games. I actually think part of what could be a real opportunity for us as communicators and as leaders is to help, especially younger generations, but I think this is true of anybody who's just got a basis, a small basis of knowledge on pop culture. But I think those are actually sort of prophetic ways of understanding humanity, technology, government, control. I mean, even 1984. My son a few years ago was just enraptured by that book. He said, "Dad, I want you to read this." I never happened to read 1984, and we read it together. And it was just it became a real topic of conversation, through a lot of different things, in terms of truth and, like erasing ideas. And so I think there's actually a moment for us as leaders to use story and pop culture story and especially dystopian fiction to say, what are the deeper principles this is teaching us about how the scriptures, I call it digital Babylon, but how the scriptures give us a lens to understand some deeper truths about why these stories have resonance, like why the Hunger Games it's not a story about a pandemic, but it's a story about society, being built on a set of presuppositions and all of those being ruined. And now we're all in different districts, separated based on our utility. And so I wonder if there's, sort of preaching through or communicating through, it doesn't even have to be a sermon series, but there's this sense, I think, in which what I see in our data is that people are so hungry for connection and for connecting all of these, elements of life, loss. Dave, you posted on Instagram, you lost your mom very recently. Health and public health, government. I mean, there's some story even deeper than the vax, anti-vax, mask, no mask. There's some story about all of us trying to control something in our lives, which ultimately is, Ecclesiastes has been such an incredible book for me because it's about none of us really control anything. So let's just be honest about that. And the end of the matter is to fear God and keep His commandments. And so I just feel like there's something important about us looking at pop culture and especially dystopian, sort of fiction as a way of understanding, kind of a way of inserting a sacred frame, a reality of why does embodiment matter? Why does the incarnation matter? And anyway, I think it's a little nerd moment brought to you all from.
I love this conversation though. I'm sad this isn't all Joe Rogan in a 7-hour podcast, but this is really good. What are you going to say, Dave?
I was going to say, David, when you said there, control, one of the questions you sent me is what is on your mind as you reflect on 2021? And I was thinking, what was on my mind as I reflect back on 2021 is how control is an illusion. That's basically what I've been reflecting on. Control is an illusion. And privileged people, that illusion works for them until, the bottom falls out. But most of the world realizes this and has realized it the last 2 years, that control is an illusion. And I've just been reflecting on that a lot and how I try to control all kinds of things. My wife is due in a couple of days, January 3rd. And I have no control of when my son comes and what it will be like. It's our second child. And I have to, this morning practicing, I have to learn to give up control. I want to control. I want it to be like this thing, whatever. But leaders are like that. They control outcomes. They learn how to control things to where people want to show up in a building and want to be part of your church because you have some level of control where you're shaping and you're curating this experience of God and this knowing Him and this, but learning that it's all illusion. I think we've learned that last couple of years, and we'll continue to learn it. And it's a good thing. It's a good lesson to learn that control is an illusion. So I give up this need for control, and I open myself to God and what God has for our future.
In my scripture reading this morning, I was came across Jesus' line that says, "Whom the Son sets free is free indeed." And so when we're free from our illusions of control, for example, we're really free to live in a new and better way. And I feel like that's been something I've been certainly reflecting on, this idea of what do you control, what don't you control? Really nothing. With parenting 3 young adults, 22, 20, and 17, with losing my wife a year and a half ago, with running a business through COVID, with trying to help the church, with all sorts of things that you imagine, and then God gives us agency and gives us something to do in the world, which we do affect real change in our environments and the faithful choices that we make, for sure. So there's something there, but whom the Son sets free is free indeed.
That's good.
This is good, man. Any resolution or hope that you have as you move into 2022, Dave?
Yeah, my resolution as I go into this next year, it's really this last couple of months that I've been trying to do it. I'm going to resolve, and it's just really to enjoy the community God has called me to lead, to enjoy, enjoying greeting people, whether sometimes there's not as many people in the room as you had hoped, and your sermon isn't as good as you thought it was going to be in your head, and whatever, all that stuff. But to really enjoy the lives and the people that God has called me to lead, enjoy my community and the people and their stories and their questions, and to enjoy them as people, is the thing that I'm like trying to carry into the future. Because I don't really have control of anything. I don't have that much control. I'm learning, but really enjoying the people that God has called me to lead is like my resolution.
That is a fantastic place to stop. Dave, Lomas, thank you so much for being with us on Church Pulse Weekly. Hey, leaders, on behalf of David Kinnaman and I, we're with you. This has been unbelievable over the last couple of years. We're going to try to make sense of it week after week. We're going to focus on some practical things and also some deep philosophical, theological, theoretical things we need to be pondering on this podcast that are close to the church and church leaders. Make sure you join us. Set some time aside. We're going to be bringing you the state of your church. David and I and the whole team at Barna and beyond will be bringing you a live webcast that we will be so excited to be able to share with you. And you can register at barna.com/state of your church. So we're very excited for that, and hope you'll be joining us for the live stream of that. In the meantime, Happy New Year, and thanks for hanging in there in 2021.